I hope you have a good day, Norman
And I hope
Fenton.
I hope you don't edit that bit out, but no doubt you will.
This is Here's How, Ireland's political, social and current affairs podcast, presented by William Campbell.
Thank you for downloading episode 127 for the 12th of November 2021. The AGSI is the Association of Garda Sergeants and Inspectors. It's basically the trade union for more senior Gardaí. You mostly hear them on the news when they're explaining that, yes, Gardaí should get more powers, and of course, no, nobody is needed to have any oversight over what they do with those powers. The ICCL is the Irish Council for Civil Liberties. They're a group mostly of nerdy lawyers who dedicate themselves to the often thankless task of campaigning for civil rights and for checks and balances on the powers of government. So, when you see a story where the AGSI is pitted against the ICCL, as they often are, you wouldn't normally have much difficulty guessing which side I would be likely to come down on. But I saw a story this week that bucks that trend. The AGSI, who are having their annual conference, have issued a call for the widespread use of body cams by Gardaí. To be fair to the AGSI, they've maintained their form with a whole slew of other demands for regressive measures and attacking any semblance of accountability for the Gardaí, but on this one policy about body cams, it's interesting. All the more interesting is that it's opposed by the ICCL. And, to be fair to the ICCL, they do argue their case very cogently, making points about how they invade privacy, how they record the public, but not the Gardaí who wear them, and contrary to Garda claims, there seems to be no evidence that they improve criminal justice outcomes. But taking all that into account, I think, with certain provisos, the case for Garda body cams is strong. With certain provisos. I'll get back to that. In particular, looking at the ICCL argument that they could reduce trust in policing, I think it's fair to comment that the people who end up in disputes with Gardaí in the circumstances where body cam video is relevant, those people already have a pretty low level of trust in Gardaí in the first place. That low level of trust could well be justified. Firstly, we know that the AGSI and other Garda organisations fight like cats and dogs against any degree of accountability. Anyone trying to hide their behaviour that badly knows that they have something to hide. There have been notable cases where Garda evidence has seemed very unreliable, as well as incidents, notably at the Shell to Sea protests, where Gardaí confiscated or smashed the cameras of civilians videoing confrontations, and on the occasions that they returned the equipment, all the recordings were thoroughly wiped. Again, anyone doing that clearly has something to hide. I've mentioned on this podcast before the case of the journalist Dara Quigley, who was filmed by Garda cameras suffering from mental illness, naked and in distress in a Dublin street. Gardaí called up the footage on the screen at the control centre, videoed that screen on their phones, and shared the video with thousands of people via WhatsApp. Dara Quigley died by suicide days later. Which all brings me to the provisos. Depending on the model and settings of the body cams, they can be switched on and off at the discretion of the officer wearing it. If you want to engender trust, that's not the way to do it. One option would be, if the technology is up to it, to have the camera recording all the time. If that isn't possible, then it should automatically switch on if the wearer is moving vigorously, and when the off button is pressed, it should keep recording for a randomized number of minutes. The video should be automatically uploaded via mobile networks in real time to a secure server, with access granted only when senior Gardaí provide a written request, And the system should obviously be password protected and record the credentials of whoever accesses the video. I don't know if the AGSI would welcome those safeguards, but if they were implemented, I don't think that the concerns about privacy and other problems would go away, but I do think that they would be outweighed by the advantage of having verifiable evidence and the improvement in behaviour that would bring. In a moment, we'll have an interview with Professor Norman Fenton of Queen Mary University in London. But first I want to thank all of my donors on Patreon. I really appreciate everyone who donates on Patreon. It's basically a web service that allows you to give €1 or €2 per month or per podcast. And that helps us to devote more time to research topics and to find interesting guests. If you think you could do the same as them, then there's details on the website and at the end of the show.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
On the line, I have Professor Norman Fenton. He's a professor at Queen Mary University of London, and also there he is a director of the Risk Information Management Research Group. And Norman is probably best known now for a lot of tweeting that he's done, which is sceptical of the government and health authorities' positions on COVID and the COVID vaccines and COVID prevention. Norman, I'm struggling there a little bit, not to say the official story, but that's a good shorthand for what we might be talking about. Can you tell me, maybe just very succinctly, where you differ or how you disagree with what is the government and health authorities' position on COVID and prevention?
Well, I think that the lockdowns never had any basis empirically in terms of there was no cost-benefit analysis. It was always, you don't have to be, I didn't think you needed to be a mathematician as I am to understand that there were going to be many downsides of the kind of lockdowns that were installed. Mm-hmm. But from my mathematical perspective, we'd already done an analysis of the way that the government was presenting COVID case data, mm-hmm. and we'd seen that was all driven by this PCR testing, which essentially equating.
This is one of the types of testing people for COVID.
Yeah, this is the main type of testing that was done and continues to be done. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that most people testing positive for COVID are not ill, may have no virus at all, and
wait, just to clarify what you're saying. Most people testing positive for COVID with the PCR test are not ill and do not have COVID. Now, there's a lot of people who have COVID who do not show symptoms, but are you saying that most people who test positive for COVID, they are not actually infected?
Yes, yeah, we're saying that, and it's because of the you've got these false positive rates on these tests. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're run at these very high cycles. But I'll give you some very, very clear, absolutely indisputable data about this, because we looked, for example, at the data coming out of Cambridge University, where they were actually rigorously testing thousands of asymptomatic students mm-hmm. On a regular basis, on a weekly basis, right? And this, I think, gives us the best. And what's more, when there was a positive test, mm-hmm. they retested the same sample, right? And the best information, and so this happened over a number of months. And when the period we were looking at it, and I've written easily accessible material on this, and there's a video out there on YouTube about this. Mm-hmm. There were 43 cases. There were 43 positive cases, of which only 6, when they retested it, were positive again. Now, it's actually possible that even those 6 that were tested positive again didn't actually have the virus. But that just gives you a real world indication of the extent to which when you're testing.
Okay, so numbers in an audio format. I don't want to go too deeply down into numbers in an audio format, Norm, because obviously that can leave people confused. So you had a population of how many people were tested originally?
So they were testing, over the period we were looking at, they were testing approximately 3,000 a week. But this period we were looking at, there was 10,000 of whom 43...
So 10,000 people tested, and 43 of them, as it would appear, tested positively.
Yeah, they were tested
falsely.
in pools. So there was actually about 2,000 pools, or 2,000 or 3,000 pools tested. 43 were positive, but when they retested them, only 6 were positive. So,
Yeah, but Norman, 90% of base rate errors are made by right-handed people. And that is a mathematics joke that I'm sure that you will understand. Not all the listeners might. It means that it is important sometimes to be careful whether you're looking at the percentage or the absolute number. What you're saying is that something like 10,000 people were tested, and in that 10,000 there were 40 errors, give or take. That's not a huge amount.
No, it's not. In fact, the number of people who didn't have, the number of people who, let's say, who did not have the virus but who tested positive is a very small percentage. It was less than 0.5%, indeed.
Yeah.
Right. But that doesn't matter, because the ones who are counting, the fact is that most of those who were testing positive on a PCR test and who would definitely have been classified as a case in all the government statistics, most of those, nearly 90%, did not have the virus.
Yes, but saying most is expressing a proportion of a proportion, and what I think you have agreed is that out of 10,000 tests there were something in the region of 40 false positives, but I don't want to get too tied up in that. What I want to do is I want to get more of an overview of the landscape, and anybody, and I know you are very active on social media, and anybody who is will know that there is an avalanche out there of narratives about COVID that sum up to saying the government is wrong, the health authorities are wrong. Any one of those narratives may or may not be believable, but those narratives taken together are so self-contradictory that it's clear that the great bulk of them are nonsensical. So, for example, we have people who say that COVID does not exist. We also have people who say that COVID escaped from a lab where it was being researched. We also have people who say that COVID is a bioweapon that was deliberately infected into the population. We also have people who say that COVID is the result of 5G mobile phone towers. Clearly, the great majority of those stories are untrue just by virtue of the fact that they all contradict each other, and no two of them could be true. What I want to maybe get from you, so that we have a...
Can I come back? That's a very interesting set of list of claims that you made there.
Yeah, and you can come across all of those stories within a few seconds of going on Twitter, being promoted. But what I want to do is, and sorry to interrupt you, what I want to do is just to get a very broad narrative from you of what you think is the case with that. Do you believe COVID exists? Do you believe it's a threat? Do you believe we should do anything about it?
Well, interesting enough, the only one of those of that list which is in any way, I think, widely, let's say, promoted is that the virus, it was escaped from the lab in Wuhan, right? And I don't think there are that many serious people promoting those other things at all. I mean,
serious is a value judgment. Serious is a value judgment. But I can say that I've been researching this and on Twitter, and you are at any given time are seconds away from having people who are stating any one of those stories with great fierceness.
So, well, as I say, the only one of those which I think is, it's interesting that those who are claiming that this almost certainly came from the Wuhan lab, of course, were called conspiracy theorists for a long time. And anybody claiming that, in fact, many people claim that, of course, had their Twitter accounts shut down and their YouTube accounts shut down. And then, of course, later on, they decided actually that was probably the most likely source. But
who are they? Who are they?
Who are they? What do you mean? Who are they?
You said they decided that was the most likely source. Who are they?
Well, even in the US, even the CDC, the US government and have essentially said that this is a credible theory.
Yes, but they didn't say that was true. But just specifically, you use the word "they" in that sentence. Who are they? You said they have concluded this is the most likely source of COVID.
Well, these are like the so-called the people who basically were promoting the official narrative that this wasn't a possibility before. So people like the CDC in the US.
No, the CDC emphatically haven't said that. The CDC have said that is something that is worth investigating. They haven't said that it is the most likely source.
Well, okay, but this is a bit of an irrelevance, isn't it? Because actually, I don't particularly have a great view on the origins of. I'm not interested particularly in the origins of the virus.
Yeah, I actually agree with you.
So
I
it's
don't
not
think
my-
the
yeah.
origins. And the reason I
I've never
pressed you
tweeted
on that.
anything on that. I've never tweeted anything. I've never said anything about the origins of the virus.
Actually, the word that you have tweeted very, very often, I've got a whole list of your tweets in front of me, and the word that I think is really relevant, that is all over the place, is the word they, without ever any explanation as to who they are. And I'd really like to know who they are. And it's they, from context, in all of your tweets, seem to be...
I've never said they in the context of Escape from Labs. I've never asked you that. But
I mean right across the
board.
board. You're saying they want to lock us up, they want to take away our civil liberties, they are hiding the data. Who are they?
Okay, well, the UK government, all of those who've signed up, for example, to the WF Great Reset, those are the people who are pushing that narrative.
The WF Great Reset, what is that?
The World Economic Forum and the Great Reset.
Okay, and who have signed up to that? Is that an international treaty of some sort, or what is it?
It's what, have you ever heard the expression Build Back Better that every single major Western leader has been talking about?
It's a political slogan, yeah.
Continually. That is an agenda which was basically created.
That's a slogan.
That wording comes from the Great Reset, and I suggest that you go and look up what there's no conspiracy here. This is out the World Economic Forum, which is led by Klaus Schwab, in which all of the major world leaders who have been the most active in promoting the lockdowns and increasingly now vaccine mandates are all effectively signed up to the World Economic Forum Build Back Better Great Reset agenda. And Klaus Schwab, the leader of the World Economic Forum, even wrote a book called The Great Reset. And I'll tell you something interesting about the Great Reset, right? I didn't know anything about the Great Reset until I was actually on a part of a panel discussing the whole COVID pandemic very early on. I think this was like late spring of 2020. And on that panel were a number of other academics, and they were all talking about the Great Reset and how this pandemic created this massive and great opportunity. They were quite excited by the opportunity that it created to move towards this Great Reset.
Okay, pause on that idea. I think we've got that idea and I understand that. But what I want to just clarify with you, is that a political slogan that allows people to encapsulate various reforms that they want under a single heading? Or is it some sort of vast world conspiracy?
Well, it's certainly all of the people who have bought into that narrative, and this is, we can name the world leaders. And these people include people who were trained as the young leaders of the World Economic Forum. People like Trudeau in Canada, and of course Ardern in New Zealand. These were actually trained as young leaders, years ago by the World Economic Forum. They've bought into this. It's part of an agenda which I think is very closely tied to the climate change agenda and the need for, I have gone on the record and said, I do believe, and this is because it's what the other academics who saw this as a great opportunity were saying to me, that this should lead to the COVID lockdowns should eventually lead to climate lockdowns, because they saw the need for generally all of the
who said this? No, they. Norman, I'm going to stop you there because your
the other academics. Let's just say, most of my academic colleagues. How many do you want me to lead? How many people do you want me to name who have absolutely categorically been clear about the fact that this is that the climate change agenda and the need for reduced.
Wait. What is the climate change agenda?
Reduced international travel, the greater control over what people are able to do with their literally with their money in terms of its impact on carbon emissions, even to the extent of what they eat, wanting to reduce meat, the amount of meat that people, the amount of people eat meat that people eat, right to that level of detail, and needing to have to monitor that. That's part of that agenda, because they see that this is such a
just to be clear, Norman, when you say agenda, is what you mean policy proposals?
You could call it that, but they're quite open. They've been quite open about the fact there
Who are they?
shouldn't be any discussion about that.
Okay, Norman, I know that you're a mathematician. And one of the things that's most important in mathematics, and that extends into computer science and so forth, is precision. And there's an old joke about, and it can be told about either mathematicians or computer programmers, and a computer programmer's or mathematician's wife tells him to go to the shop and get a loaf of bread, and if there are eggs, get a dozen. And the computer programmer comes back with 12 loaves of bread. And the wife said, why did you do that? And she said, well, you said if there were eggs, get a dozen. And that type of precision in language is sometimes useful and sometimes not. But we need to understand what we're talking about here. And you've rattled off some various policy proposals that are at various stages of acceptance. And as far as I see it, some of them are sensible, some of them are not sensible, some of them are crackpot type suggestions. But what I have a difficulty with is you assembling all of these together and attributing them to a group which you seem to be ill able to define, but seem to think are all the World Economic Forum that are all acting with a degree of interconnection and cooperation that would be truly historic on world terms between world leaders. Isn't there a danger here? And you've mentioned in your tweets, for example, attributing some of this to George Soros. We're getting very close in those tweets blaming or attributing this to George Soros. We're getting very close to anti-Semitic world government type conspiracy theories, aren't we?
Well, you may not be aware, but my father's a Holocaust survivor, and I'm Jewish, right? And,
I'm not, but nevertheless.
So to accuse me of
to roll that back then and hate to do the Godwin's law, but then you should be very clearly aware of how a largely disparate group of people in Germany were painted as a single cooperating monolith with a singular aim. And you are doing the same thing here, aren't you? This word they is showing up all over the place, completely ill-defined, particularly in your tweets.
Well, it's interesting you say that the people of Germany were classifying people as a single monolith, i.e. they were demonizing the Jewish people. That's exactly what's now happening throughout the world with the unvaccinated people.
How so?
It's ironic.
Now just have to stop you there. You, child of a Holocaust survivor, are seriously saying that people encouraging vaccinations against a potentially lethal disease is on a par with the actions of Nazi Germany?
No, I didn't say that, did I? You said that.
Well, that sounded like that to me. Then clarify.
That people are classifying. You're, I can't remember your exact words, but you were talking about people were monolithically classified in one grouping, and that's exactly how the unvaccinated are now being grouped.
How so? Give me an example of that.
Listen to the rhetoric of these state leaders in Australia. Listen to the rhetoric of Trudeau in Canada. Increasingly, many UK government ministers have been using the same rhetoric. They're the ones who are talking about they in relation to the unvaccinated.
Give me an example.
They're the ones who...
Give me an example.
An example of them talking about they in the context of the unvaccinated.
No, an example of treating them all as...
They will not be allowed, the unvaccinated, will not be able to participate fully in society. That's been said by just about every single Australian state leader. That's on the agenda for the COVID passports in this country. That's this country being the UK. That's plan B. That's the plan B is that from mid-December potentially in the UK we may well have COVID passports here where only people other than the they who are unvaccinated are able to go into shops and go to sporting events and stuff like that.
Okay, hold on for a second with that. And that's a reason. Okay, that's a reasonable. I don't think that it was expressed in the terms that you claim it was, but I think it's a reasonable topic for debate. And when I went to travel in Southeast Asia, I was told the list of vaccines that I'd have to get in order to go. Many countries there, you literally can't get in without having the right vaccines. Going back literally hundreds of years, there have been requirements to get vaccinated against the disease of the day in order to essentially participate in events that would risk you, if you were not vaccinated, infecting people. And I've seen, both in your tweets and others, this being referred to as everything up to apartheid. That's really insane. Now, people, in my view, have a right, if they don't want to get a vaccine, for whatever reason, they have a right not to get that vaccine. But they don't have a right to impose on the rest of society the duty to make sure that they are insulated from the effects of their own decisions. And it seems blindingly obvious that people, if they don't want to get a vaccine, that's fine. But it's blindingly obvious that people who have chosen not to get a vaccine should be the ones who suffer the inconvenience that that causes.
Well, first of all, you're assuming that this vaccine is actually effective. I mean, we're looking in detail actually at the moment at the Public Health England figures and the ONS data. And it's clear that in most age categories at the moment, that there actually is a higher rate of infection amongst the vaccinated than the unvaccinated.
Slow down with that. Because I want to understand that, and clarity is important on that. You're saying
the latest Office for National Statistics Public Health England data is showing actually higher rates of infection in each age category of people being infected who are vaccinated than unvaccinated.
So a higher rate of Norman, because I want to understand what you said very clearly. You're saying higher rate of vaccine. I'm going to pause you there because I want to make sure that I'm understanding the claim correctly. You're saying that there is a higher rate of infection amongst people who are vaccinated. That is to say, 100 vaccinated people is likely to contain more people infected with COVID than 100 unvaccinated people.
Yeah, that's
Do I
the
understand
latest
that?
ONS data. Yeah, you can look that up. Yeah.
Okay, and once that happens,
there are caveats. Of course, people say, "Oh, well, they're using the wrong denominator." But
no. I understand. I just want to understand what you're saying. Are you then saying that a cohort of vaccinated people is likely, because there are more of them infected, as you claim, they are more likely to be ill with COVID and more likely to die with COVID?
More likely to die is something that we're looking at the moment. The problem with that statistics, how many people, the proportion of people who die with COVID who haven't been vaccinated, is that's dependent again on the idea of the PCR test, which we don't accept as being a reliable measure of somebody having the virus or not. Therefore, what we're doing at the moment,
dying of COVID on a ventilator for weeks is a relatively. Hold on for a second. Hold on for a second. Dying of COVID is a pretty good indicator of having had COVID, and the United States, sadly, is a particularly good test case in this because you have a very large cohort of the population who are declining vaccination. There are very large swathes of the country in the US where the hospitals are packed out, and of the people on ventilators in ICU and dying of COVID, you have 95 or 97 or 98% of the people unvaccinated when the general population is maybe 55, 60% vaccinated.
Do you know that you are quoting complete lies? You have been taken in by the same propaganda that so many other people have been led to. This is almost bizarre that you've actually said something which has been demonstrably disproved about those claims.
Okay, let's take that apart.
You give me the evidence of what you've just said. It's so nonsensical that I'm simply aghast that somebody, you could actually say something as ludicrous as that.
Okay, Norman, then
completely
let me
insane.
Let me understand exactly what you're saying there. Do you accept the figure that something like 55-60% of the people in the US have been vaccinated and the other proportion not?
That sounds about right.
Okay, and there is a continuing and fairly serious, apparently to me and to the statistics that are being reported, death and serious illness rate in the US amongst the population. Do you accept that? That there are people, a large number of people in ICU and a correspondingly large number of them dying?
Well, that's probably true. That we don't know what the proportions of those, all those claims that you made are completely wrong about the proportion who are the relative proportions who are dying with and without vaccination.
But if what you were saying is true, slow down. If what you were saying is true, and that something like 55-60% of people in the US have been vaccinated, the rest not, and that people with the vaccine are more likely to get infected, you would expect more than 55-60% of the people in ICU and dying to be vaccinated. Is that correct?
In the states where there've been the higher rates of vaccination, there have actually been the higher rates of of COVID. That's another
No,
thing you can look
I know
at.
that is a proxy multiple steps away from what we're actually trying to measure. And it seems fairly obvious to me that in states where you have more infections, more people are going to be motivated to get vaccinated. But what the issue is
The
pipeline.
upturn in cases actually followed from the upturn in vaccinations, if you want to be, and that's absolutely clear. Just look at the graphs on that.
Yeah, no, but slow down on that, because that is a proxy that is several steps away from what we're trying to measure. And what we're trying to measure is your claim that if somebody is vaccinated, they are more likely to get COVID and get ill from that. And
Actually,
since we've agreed,
I'm interested in causal explanation. I wasn't stating that as a cause and effect. I was stating that on the latest ONS data, in each of the major age categories, there was a
data
higher
or not,
proportion.
causal or not, if it is the case that you're more likely to get infected, then we would expect the vaccinated to represent a larger proportion of the people ill and dying with COVID than the unvaccinated. Is that what you're claiming?
Actually, that's not true.
Explain to me why
Because
not.
I think that the vaccinations, possibly in the older age groups, are likely to decrease the probability of dying from the disease.
The vaccination is likely to increase the dying of the.
No, I think it does reduce for the older population. I think that the vaccine does reduce the possibility of death, the probability of death.
Okay. So why are you encouraging people not to take it?
Because we're looking at all-cause deaths, right? We're looking at the overall impact. So at the moment, incidentally, up to a few weeks ago, I was actually saying that people, from what we'd seen, for people over 60, the cost-benefit probably did point in favour of taking the vaccine. So that's, I think you maybe completely misunderstand me on a few things there. But now we decided that the data relating to so-called COVID deaths, which relies, of course, on a PCR test. Most of these deaths, remember, anybody dying with the virus, irrespective of what it's from, is classified as a COVID death. So that's already an issue. So we decided that the only way to take account of the potential adverse reactions from the vaccine, of which there have been many, including many deaths, right, is to look at
many is Norman. Many is a very vague statement. You said that there have been many adverse reactions, including many deaths.
16,000 or so on the VAERS database, and
16,000 people dead.
16,000 at least dead in the US database.
Let's slow down with that. 16,000 people dead with the vaccine as a cause, or 16,000 people who died who just happened to have been vaccinated?
Well, we did an analysis of the data. This was led by a colleague of mine, but I was also part of the analysis. But it was mainly clinically led, which looked at the initial batch of several hundred of the VAERS, the vaccine adverse.
Just for listeners, this is the monitoring of every time somebody dies having gotten a medicine or a vaccine. The idea is that is monitored, and you then have a list of that. But it seems to me that what you're doing there, Norman, is not consistent at all, because you're saying that, perhaps with some justification, that people who die who happen to have COVID may have died anyway, and that may well be true.
Yeah, that's why we looked. This is exactly why we looked.
But now you're saying that 16,000 people died, and you're not being clear to me whether or not you're claiming that those 16,000 people died. Well, then you can say yes or no. Whether are you claiming that those people died because of the vaccine?
Well, you didn't let me answer the question.
Go right ahead.
To answer that, right? So what we did was look through in detail all of those reports, because first of all, we wanted to check the claim which some people had made to try to discredit these reports, that they were all self-reported and you can't believe them, or they were reported by aggrieved family members, etc. Well, it turned out that actually something like close to 80%, I believe, were actually clinically reported. So they were reported either by a doctor or by a nurse or a clinically trained person, and not by a relative of the person.
Yes, but
that's the first thing. That's the first thing. The next thing we looked for, again, this was what the clinicians who were on the study looked for, was the potential relationship between the vaccine and the death itself, i.e. potential cause. And they found that in only 14% of the cases could you say that the vaccine was not the likely cause. That didn't mean to say that all of the others were definitively caused by the vaccine, but you could only rule out 14% as likely not being from the vaccine. Right, so that's a substantial proportion that you had to seriously consider the vaccine being the cause, and you just have to look at the distribution of the date, the time after death that people having had the vaccine were dying. You get this peak at the very early days after the vaccine. That's not a natural peak. That wouldn't, if you were just looking at
it is a natural. It is a natural peak for reporting.
Well, that's a possible confounder. But these were, these were individually looked at. Every one of the ones that was in the survey was individually looked at.
Okay.
And there was no obvious explanation other than the vaccine.
Yeah, but hold on for a second.
Should have died at that point.
This is U.S. statistics you're talking about. In the region of 200 million people have been vaccinated in the US. So 16,000 would be one person out of 12,500. It wouldn't be unusual for one person out of 12,500 to die in a relatively short weeks or months after any event. And a significant portion of deaths are just difficult to explain. Just nobody knows exactly. Some people might have an idea, but knows exactly. Isn't there a serious danger here that you're just fishing in the statistics for something that you want to find?
No, we've got hard statistics on things like the instance of myocarditis now as a result of the vaccination. There isn't any doubt about that massively increased risk, especially in young males.
Massively increased risk.
Massively increased risk. So we're talking about.
In young males, I'm interested in this.
Yeah.
Might not be that young, but again, there's a danger here of looking at percents instead of looking at absolute numbers. When you say a massively increased risk, if 1,000 people, let's say 1,000 young males, got the vaccine, given your massively increased risk, how many out of that 1,000 would you expect to die from myocarditis?
Well, more than would have died otherwise.
But more. You're talking about relative numbers, and absolute numbers are more important here. So if you have 1,000 males,
it's funny because absolute numbers are never used in relation to the effectiveness of the vaccine. So again, you're the one who's sort of being inconsistent.
No, I'm not being inconsistent, and I haven't talked about the effectiveness of the vaccine at all. And again, you seem to be trying to group me in with a group that I'm not a member of. But it's really important, because if you have in, let's say, a population of 1 million people, you typically get one person dying from a particular disease, and then after a particular event, you get 2 people dying from that disease. You can go around saying that the risk has doubled. But if it's from 1 in a million to 2 in a million, that's not really a significant doubling. And that's why I'm questioning you using this massively increased risk.
Yeah, well, agreed. Yeah, I mean, I was talking there. I'm a one who.
So you said,
you should talk about absolute risk rather than relative, and in that case, you're quite right. I was talking about relative risk,
let's bring that back, because you've been saying this very strenuously, Norman, and I want to go back and to get the absolute numbers on that. You said that young males are massively more likely, and the word you used was massively more likely to die of myocarditis if they get the vaccine.
I didn't say that. I said to get myocarditis, the incidence rate. The relative incidence rate is whatever it is, 25 times. It might even be more than that, greater with the vaccine than without the vaccine. And we don't know what the long-term effects of that are, right? That's another thing, that we don't know anything about the long-term effects of those types of conditions and any other adverse reactions as well.
Okay, I want to move on to something else, because I note in recent days that in your country, in the UK, there has been a report into the effectiveness of the first lockdown. And we in Ireland are aware that, because it was around St. Patrick's Day, that Ireland locked down a week earlier than the UK, and Ireland consequently suffered a significant, proportional to the population, a significantly lower death rate. And the government's COVID report is saying very specifically that the UK government got that wrong, and that cost thousands of lives. Do you accept that they're telling the truth?
Absolutely not. And the people behind this government report are the same ones who were pushing the hardest for increased lockdowns last time round. So it's just nonsense. And the empirical, you're citing the difference between what happened in Ireland and the UK, but you can equally cite many other countries where it goes in the other direction. There is just no evidence. There's just no evidence.
To be clear, there is no comparison. I'm only using the comparison with Ireland because that's where most of our listeners are. I'm talking about the House of Commons Health and Social Care Committee.
It's the same people who were pushing for lockdowns. It's the same people. It's not an independent report.
Hold on for a second. Norman, are you saying that because somebody disagrees with you, their disagreement is invalid?
Yeah, they've never presented, as I said right at the start, the evidence, the cost-benefit analysis evidence in support of lockdowns has never been established. In fact, all of the evidence, the real evidence, points to the
how do you distinguish between evidence and real evidence?
Real evidence, like actual numbers look at the number of missed cancer diagnoses this year. This is a real issue because of COVID going on, other people are dying of other diseases that they may not have suffered from or that might have been caught and so forth. And that's a real issue. They weren't diagnosed. They
were diagnosed. They didn't get the treatment.
I have friends who were denied access to treatment, which they would have got and would have been diagnosed earlier, but for the fact that effectively the health service was closed down to everything except COVID. And that was a catastrophic mistake. It's a catastrophic mistake of lockdowns. And it continues now. I mean, you can't get in the UK, you can't get face-to-face GP appointments anymore. It's like almost impossible to get that, right? The whole health service is still geared towards COVID. Right, we're missing all of these other diagnoses. Right, it's got a catastrophic effect on health, and it's not just health. It's the mental health. It's the unemployment that's been caused by this. It's the incredible debt that future generations have been put in as a result of the ridiculously generous furlough and unnecessary furlough schemes, because we should never have locked down most of these places in the first place.
So you're in charge. How would you have dealt with it?
Well, the other thing is there was no attempt.
Don't.
I'm giving you early treatment for people with COVID symptoms. The government provided. There are treatments. We know, for example, that vitamin D is a key risk factor in those who get seriously ill and die of COVID. Disproportionate number of people have vitamin D deficiency. So simple things like vitamin D and other vitamins, and then other potential treatments for which, if you even suggested them, whether it was hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, you were closed down. That this was considered to be hate speech to even be promoting alternative treatments. Well, these hold on a second. Treatments?
These were clinically tested. These were clinically tested and found not to be useful.
Actually, that's you realise we've done there's been a number of meta-analysis studies on, for example, ivermectin, and we looked at those, right? We did our own Bayesian analysis of that, and we thought there was enough evidence there to suggest that these were effective in early treatment of COVID. So why that should be not allowed is beyond belief, right?
It's not allowed. But hold on for a second, Norman. People at some stage will look at the various clinical trials and arrive at a conclusion as to whether a particular therapy, a particular drug is useful or not. And in the case of hydroxychloroquine, and in the case of hydroxychloroquine, it was decided that this was not a useful treatment based on the data.
It was decided by whom?
Based on the data.
You're the one who's accusing me. It was decided. You're using all of the tropes that you use against me to present your arguments.
By the clinical researchers who did. Are you accusing those people?
The clinical researchers who came up with the opposite results, massive observational trials, they're not to be believed, right? Only the ones that you want to believe, who are basically fitting in. You're the one who's got a narrative here you wanted to push at all costs and ignore all of the other evidence.
No, what I'm asking you is, because I'm not an expert, and the issue that I'm asking you is that the great bulk of the medical establishment accepted a particular clinical research outcome. And I'm asking you whether you're saying they're all in on a huge conspiracy, or why is it they're getting it wrong if you say they're getting it wrong?
Well, the point is that, as you know, the great bulk of clinicians are not allowed to talk about anything other than the
Yes, they are.
accepted narrative. You know that.
Who said? No, I don't.
No, the great bulk of you just have a look at the
Under
testimonies of
what
clinicians.
legislation are they not
In
allowed
the
to talk about it?
in the US, essentially anybody who speaks out against the sort of the accepted narrative, essentially is they even lose their license. They're just not allowed to practice anymore. I mean, this is this idea. It's the same with UK academia. It's the same here. People are tied to government contracts. If you want to get research funding, right? Even most of the research on COVID in the UK, the application that you had to make.
But can you see, Norman, pause. Norman, pause for a second. Can you see how paranoid and unreasonable what you're saying sounds? That you're saying that a particular drug is being falsely promoted by the medical establishment and a vaccine or whatever, and another particular treatment is being falsely hidden, and you're saying the one that works isn't being allowed, and people by some means.
I never said that the.
You said doctors are not allowed to talk about it, and that the one that doesn't work is being promoted. The great
They close down. They close down on all social media channels. They lose their jobs. These are on the record. There's no conspiracy in this. This is people challenge that narrative.
Oh, okay, because I've got the FDA. The FDA is the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. I have the quotation here. It says the FDA revoked the emergency use authorization of hydroxychloroquine, stating that it was no longer reasonable to believe that the drug was effective against COVID-19 or that its benefits outweighed its known and potential risks.
Yeah, but the FDA also said that the FDA's own meta-study, you could read this up in one of my reports, the FDA said that there was that the effectiveness of ivermectin in early treatment was highly effective, and yet for some reason they didn't recommend it. They said there was no support, and yet on similar studies for in fact, on less evidence for other treatments, they've said no, they'll support that. So,
but do you see how you're advocating that something is? So I'm not going to dispute with you every detail of what you're saying on that, but can you see that the totality of that sounds incredibly paranoid? FDA is an enormous organisation. That there is some conspiracy controlling it, promoting drugs that don't work, promoting treatments that don't work, and hiding treatments that do. Why would that be happening?
Because they want to make sure that everybody's vaccinated with the COVID vaccine. Simple as that.
Yeah, but why?
If people knew there were other treatments, they wouldn't get vaccinated, would they?
You seem to be well aware of that, but why would they do that? What would be the base reason for that?
Well, because it's all about control, isn't it?
What does that mean? I have no idea what that means.
Well, what do you think the vaccine passports and mandates are all about? The fact you can't actually go to, to do your shopping now in many countries in the world if you can't display proof, on a mobile phone that you've had the full vaccination. What do you think? It's all about control, isn't it?
But I literally don't understand what you mean. And for example, in order to go to school, I had to get the various childhood vaccines. In order to travel to Southeast Asia, I had to get vaccines against the endemic diseases there. Was I being controlled there? Did I suffer some level of control that I didn't notice?
No, because you're conflating things, aren't you? Here, those are vaccines which have been proven in trials over many years.
So for the first year that they were being used, well, no, it's not experimental. They're fully licensed vaccines. But for the first year that, for example, yellow fever vaccines were required for traveling to South. The trials never end. All drugs haven't ended yet. That's true of all drugs. The first year that yellow fever vaccines were required for traveling to countries in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, because yellow fever is highly that's something that if you catch it, I can't remember the percent, but there's a very high probability you'll die. That's not the case with COVID.
Yeah, and there's also a high probability you'll spread it to other people.
You got that with people who've had the vaccine. There's just as high probability that they'll spread it with COVID vaccines as other people. So what's the rationale for having a passport for it?
Okay. You are promoting.
That's not the case with the other viruses, is it? This is not a vaccine like those other vaccines.
Okay.
That's why your analogy with kids having it is a complete nonsense, because this has not been proven to be an effective vaccine yet. Therefore, to mandate it now makes
Well,
absolutely
you
no
weren't
sense.
able to. You weren't
It
able
makes
to
no
give me.
sense at all.
We spoke about that earlier, and you did seem to agree that it prevented people from dying, which I would have thought was the purpose of a vaccine. But nevertheless, the
Yeah,
one
well,
thing that
that's what
you
that
know, the
again,
one
you
thing
didn't let
that
me
you've
come on. You
okay,
didn't let me come
pause
on
on
to
that
the-
for a second. Pause on that for a second, because the one thing that you've promoted are hydroxychloroquine. I don't know if you are.
I've never promoted. Do you know something? I've never ever mentioned hydroxychloroquine. Right? We've done analysis of ivermectin. I've never looked at hydroxychloroquine. You're the one who brought that one up, right? But
You have questioned. I mentioned
Yeah.
that the FDA have said that this is not an appropriate treatment, and you said that
Yeah,
this
there are
was
plenty
some
of
form
people
of
who say it
conspiracy.
isn't. There are plenty of clinicians who say it is
You're
effective,
starting
but
to sound
very
like
quickly
Donald
others.
Trump now. You disputed that. There is one particular prevention which is known to be effective, which is wearing a mask, and you seem to be resolutely against that.
Oh, it's the evidence for that is extremely dodgy, right? There've been as many studies saying that it can reduce infections as being non-effective. So the point is, it's all about the theatre, isn't it? It's all about installing fear. The more if you see people walking around with the
But by
mask,
who?
that
Who's
creates a
theatre?
sense of fear. It's fear and propaganda. That's all it is. That's what
Who's
it's all
fear and
about.
propaganda? I mean, what you're suggesting is that governments around the world, many of whom are at each other's throats, from Iran to the United States, are somehow coordinating this massive, yet very successful and very secretive conspiracy against the people.
Build back better. Why do you think they're all saying? If it's not
This is a
coincidence,
clever
why do you think every
slogan.
world leader is saying build? Why are they all saying build back better, which just happened to be the World Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum slogan for the Great Reset?
Norman, do you not see that that's a slogan? And it kind of works because it's alliteration, but it's not a policy.
Give me an example. Give me an example. Previously anywhere in recent history where all of these, as you say, all of these governments which have nothing in common, most of them suddenly are all lockstep repeating the same mantra with the same agenda.
Typically a war.
War is where you've got opposing countries. Here we've got
Yes, but
all
the
of these
Allied
lockstep.
countries, typically when they share a single enemy, shall we say, you could call the virus, they tend to, when they're facing the same challenge, they tend to behave in the same way. That's pretty standard. But
same
nevertheless, I'm asking the questions.
I've given you the evidence. You said to me, "Where
You haven't given me
it's
evidence,
impossible."
Norman.
I've given you. Isn't the evidence that every one of these world leaders is saying the same, is repeating over and over again the same slogan, and at the same time tying it into the climate change narrative, which is, of course, the next big thing and the major reason ultimately why they want control and these passports, because they want to control everywhere that people are traveling, not just abroad, but also how much carbon they're using up, how much petrol they're buying, etc. That's as I say, that's what they're all saying. And I, as I say, I wasn't even aware of this until I realised that most of my academic colleagues this is something that they were actively promoting.
And yet you
themselves.
can't even give a clear definition of who they are.
How many times do I have to say this? The World Economic Forum.
The World Economic Forum
is
is
leading this.
Yeah,
the
this
Davos
is
group. These are people, and this is and all of those people who are committed to massive societal change as a necessary requirement to combat climate change, of whom there's a very, very large number. Most of the the United Nations is committed to this. So when you've got in fact most of the major international NGOs are committed to it as well. Just look at again, even the charities that it's all part of this requirement. Society has to change. The Build Back Better has to change because otherwise we're effectively all doomed from climate change.
Norman, do you think there's a possibility here that what we're dealing with in this kind of social media reaction is just the reaction of people who don't like things changing?
Well, who gave these people the right to say that we had to change? Who were they voted in? These people? Was Klaus Schwab? Who voted Klaus Schwab in?
I've no idea who that is.
Right. In which case, you've got no right to be holding these kinds of conversations about it if you don't know who Klaus Schwab is. That is astonishing to me that you have not done you've not done even the minutest amount of research to understand things like the Great Reset and the role of the World Economic Forum. You are just exposing yourself here as somebody who's totally unqualified to have this conversation.
Norman, I think we can't take it any further than that, but thank you very much for talking to me. I hope you have a good day. Norman
And I hope
Fenton.
I hope you don't edit that bit out, but no doubt you will.
We'll see about that. Norman Fenton, Professor at Queen Mary University of London, Director of the Risk Information Management Research Group there. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Never miss a show. Follow at Here's How Podcast on Twitter and like Here's How on Facebook for updates on each show's contents.
I want to clarify a couple of things that Norman said there. First off, Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum. This is basically an annual event where the captains of politics and business get together to hobnob. This organization is the centerpiece of a whole slew of the craziest conspiracy theories. I'm not going to go into them here, but the core claim that Norman made was that Schwab and the WEF are making decisions that he doesn't like. This is nonsense. The WEF has no legislative function and no executive function either, other than to manage its own event. It doesn't have the power to decide anything much bigger than what's on the menu for their shindig. Now, I'm sure that Schwab is a pretty influential person, given who he probably has saved in his phone contacts, but that means soft power, access to decision makers, the ability to persuade them. Neither he nor the WEF have any authority over any of them. It's certainly true that politicians meet at the WEF. It's probably also true that to some degree they make plans there to coordinate their policies. But what Norman is claiming, that the WEF as a body is making legally binding decisions, is just nonsense. It's the equivalent of claiming that the manager of the Inchydoney Island Hotel is in control of Ireland because political parties often have their think-ins there. Earlier, Norman claimed that the ONS confirms that people being vaccinated makes them more susceptible to COVID. The Office for National Statistics, the ONS, is the official government statistics office of the UK. It's a really good service. It was made independent for the specific reason of not having politicians pressuring it to come up with convenient statistics, and it's generally well regarded. I contacted the ONS about that claim. Although they don't quantify it, they said that their latest figures available indicated that vaccinated people are, in fact, less likely to test positive for coronavirus. But they emphasised that there can be confounding factors, such as people who refuse the vaccine also refusing to wear masks and thereby more likely to get infected. So I also looked up a study from Imperial College London that indicated that vaccinated people are 3 times less likely to get infected. I've emailed Norman asking him for a source for his claim, but he hasn't responded yet. But even if what he was saying was true, and he can't seem to back it up, and there is a lot of evidence to the contrary, this dodges the point that the purpose of the vaccine isn't ultimately to prevent people getting infected. It's to prevent people from dying and getting seriously ill. And as even he seemed to admit, there is an avalanche of evidence that the overwhelming number of people dying or in ICU with COVID come from the minority of the population who are unvaccinated. At times in the interview, Norman seemed to accept that. At other times, he scoffed at believing any evidence that they tell us, whoever they are, at a given point. And to me, that's the core of the problem with his worldview. It is the clearest litmus test for an irrational conspiracy theorist. That is, there is no set of circumstances, no possible finding that can refute their theory. If a government body like the ONS produces data which seems to back up his belief, then there you go, even they have to admit it. And when they produce data that refutes the conspiracy theory, that's proof too. See, even they're in on it. That just shows how big the conspiracy is. It goes right to the top, man. And this guy is a professor of mathematics. Go to the website for sources and references from the show, and I'm not a subject matter expert here, so if I've got something wrong, please feel free to get in touch with me and let me know. While you're on the website, you can like the show on Facebook, you can follow the show on Twitter at Here's How Podcast, and if you suffer from low blood pressure, you can self-medicate by following Norman Fenton at Prof. N. Fenton, and get in touch with me if you can suggest a guest or a different topic for the next show. Thanks again to all of the patrons on Patreon. Their donations allow me to devote time to research and finding interesting guests. And if you could do the same as them, please donate €1 or €2 per podcast or per month. You can do so at patreon.com/here'show. That link is on the website. Also, there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast for free on your computer, on your phone, or by email. All that information is at www.here'show.ie. The Here's How podcast is produced and presented by me, William Campbell. The assistant producer is Kevin Wolf. Thank you for listening.